And this is the Right Now show, which is a twice weekly show about politics and government here, sponsored by the New Republic. I'm honored to be joined by Kathy Roberts Ford, professor of journalism at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And what we're talking about today is Jimmy Kimmel's suspension that happened last night. And also, there was a lawsuit Trump filed against the New York Times. And we're going to really focus on like what I'm describing as kind of Trump's war on the media, because I think that's what's happening. So, Professor, thanks for joining me.
It's great to see you again, Perry.
So, Jimmy Kimmel is a comedian, and he's not even as focused on the news as Jon Stewart was, back in the Daily Show era. So, but I'm really concerned about this, and I think I'm right to be. So, explain to people why it's concerning these series of events that resulted in Jimmy Kimmel being something that is so concerning from a
Yeah.
media freedom perspective.
So, what appears to have happened is Jimmy Kimmel has been suspended. His show has been suspended by ABC indefinitely, we're said. So, it's a little unclear the degree of this suspension. This happened after his monologue in which he mentioned the murder of Charlie Kirk. And in talking about that murder, my understanding is that he said something to the effect of he was opining or talking about the political ideology of the killer, and suggesting that maybe the killer's political ideology was more MAGA oriented than it was anything else. And we know that the facts on the ground are still very much at play regarding the political ideology of the killer, but both Trump and the FCC chairman put pressure on ABC to get rid of the Jimmy Kimmel show. The FCC chairman has this incredible power to yank a network's license. And so this is a real chilling of free expression. By the way, it's the First Amendment forbids the use of regulatory threats and pressure to silence critics and to silence political discussion. And so this is very, very concerning.
We should mention the role of like Nexstar here. Do you understand that pretty well, or how the
No, why don't you talk about Nexstar?
So I guess part of what's going on is like it appears that there was a group of affiliates who said first, we are going to take off Jimmy
Yes.
Kimmel's show, inspired by the FCC chairman sort of hinting you should do this. The affiliates said we're going to remove, and Nexstar owns lots of affiliate stations, ABC affiliates, but Nexstar is trying to get a merger done, which requires the FCC's approval. Because I think part of what's happened throughout the year is like these regulatory approvals seem to be a great way to control. It seems to sort of force media compliance. We will not approve your merger unless you do what we want. Seems to be a little bit of the story at CBS too.
That's exactly right. And that's what happened, as we understand it, with the Stephen Colbert show. Stephen Colbert criticized CBS's settlement with, as I remember, if I'm remembering correctly, CBS settled over the 60 Minutes interview
Yes.
for $16 million. I think Trump was suing for something like $10 billion. And that this was also a moment when Paramount, which owns CBS, was seeking a merger with Skydance. It's at that very moment. And so it seems as though these mergers by parent companies of news media institutions are being politicized in order to pressure the parent companies into doing the bidding of government officials.
You said the First Amendment is violated by X. And I mean, the literal words of the First Amendment are we have a freedom of press and religion and so on. So when you said that, what you meant is the precedent has been that the FCC, or what do you mean when you say the First Amendment bars this?
All right. So, hi.
Anna Marie Cox has joined us as well, and we're talking about Jimmy Kimmel. So go ahead, Professor.
Yeah. So, the plain text of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or the press, the part that we're concerned about here. It seems straightforward, but it's been elaborated on over the centuries by court precedent. And so it's not so plain what it means. But one thing that it's been interpreted to mean over time by the Supreme Court, and as recently as 2024 in a case called NRA the Bulo, is that the government regulators cannot pressure like banks and insurers, institutions like this, to get them to speak in a particular way, or to punish certain kinds of speech, or to not be committed to certain groups they can't compel speech. And so that's the First Amendment forbids that, and the First Amendment also forbids or the First Amendment, I shouldn't say forbid, but when we think about the defamation cases that are being used prolifically by President Trump, the First Amendment gives robust protection to errors made by the press or any of us, right, in our public speech. That's a famous New York Times case called New York Times v. Sullivan, and it's called the actual malice standard. We can talk more about that later, but I think that's a kind of answer to your question.
Let me ask about, so Kimmel. So if the FCC chairman had called the head of ABC and said, Jimmy Kimmel's show must end, that would be one thing. What appears to be happening is a little bit more tricky, only because it appears what happened is the FCC chairman hinted about, and then he hinted that maybe the affiliates should maybe cancel the show, and then they did. So it's a little. So I assume this is not.
It's pressure.
Perfect,
it's
it's
not
pressure.
perfect. It's not. It's not. This is not a case. Number one. Number two. These are pressure tactics that are being used. And they're not. They're. I would not say that these were in the spirit of democracy.
Anna, let me start at the beginning here and just ask. Okay, so Jimmy Kimmel is not a journalist. Jimmy Kimmel does not break news. Jimmy Kimmel's show is not even as political as, say, The Daily Show was a couple decades ago. Right. I'm still really concerned about this and what happened. And talk about your feelings about this, your general reaction to what happened. This feels really like a moment to me of sorts.
It is. I think it is a moment. I think we have seen just how quickly the entertainment industry, the media industry more broadly, is willing to, obey in advance, surrender in advance. I think that the most concerning thing in some ways is this wasn't an official political action. I think this has shown how fearful these enormous industries that have tons of power, or we think of them as having power, are willing to knuckle under. But they're willing to knuckle under because they want to grow their power, right? And it's an interesting tension to me that they think that this is going to satisfy, right? I think that what we learn in authoritarian institutions is that sometimes, like these places, these centers of apparent power, mistake the knuckling under as a way to cooperate, or at least that's been the historical pattern, right? I mean, in this era of global media networks and in how they really do rely on government they work in almost partnership, right? In a way that maybe we haven't seen before, or that's what they're aiming at.
Let me probe you a little bit to ask the question. Is just so you said it's not government action. This is a little bit different. Jeff Bezos voluntarily, in some ways, got rid of his opinion section. This is a little bit different in that the FCC chairman was a little bit more actively engaged.
Right, but they could have fought it, right? Like that's the thing. What I mean about surrender in advance, obey in advance. That there's not even like a tension there.
Right.
There wasn't even like a sense of like screw off. Right? Like we're going to do this, which is something that in the past, like some like media entities, or at least individual folks, have maybe kind of made noise about. To me, this was just the threat of kind of government intervention, and wasn't even sort of like, we're doing this, but I don't know, like even some kind of admission that this is restrictive. And I think that's because, and this is the scary thing, it's because they don't care. They are willing to sacrifice all of this in order to gain whatever little bit more power or a lot more power. I mean, I worry about the working in concert between these things. I worry that this is a sign that we're going to see cooperation, right? And I think that the Bezos moves shows that. And I worry so much. Like, I could actually get emotional about this, which is the future of Perry's in our industry, right? Like, I was actually like, I have a it's funny because I've been planning on this conversation. I'm going to see my dad for the first time in a long time, and I'll be honest, like, he's a regular MSNBC viewer. He loves MSNBC, and he's always like, "Anna, you should have a show on MSNBC."
That might be good. That'd be good. Yeah.
And I should. I
Yeah.
definitely should. But I kind of want to point out to him in a way, like, Dad, you're missing the crumbling here.
Okay.
Like, you're missing that all these other, like, I love him so much, but like the ways that like the centers of like what we think of as liberal discourse, like I don't know how we alert people anymore, right? That we are under threat. Like, the New Republic is under threat. We're just like these places where you're getting like little bits of dissent, like we're being I don't know how else to
Let me
put
come
it.
back
Like,
to that in a second. I do want to come back there. Let me ask, I want to come back. Let me ask, did you, I can't, ABC's not quite, and nobody's quite saying what Jimmy Kimmel said that is actually I went through and looked at the comments and I'm a little bit confused by which one is, he speculates about the killer in a way that is probably not, we should all stop doing that in a certain way. But I
Absolutely.
don't know that, I mean, it's almost not a firing offense, but do we think that's the issue? Is like he suggested the killer was conservative and the killer is that we think the crux of this is?
That's my
That's what I've
Okay.
seen.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also, sorry to interrupt you. I think also, um, didn't he mock Trump for like switching the subject when he was asked about Charlie Kirk, and he went to like look at the trucks,
He
which
definitely did that. I'm not sure I think the offense taken is probably Kimmel. I wonder if I don't know what the offense taken is, but so the thing I wanted to come back to, I mean, in some ways, Anna mentioned smaller outlets. Let's talk about the big outlets first, though. The Trump forced or coerced, or we can debate, as you said, Disney and CBS already reached agreements in these defamation suits with him. The Wall Street Journal and the Times are now facing these defamation suits. These are very big institutions that sort of define the American media in a certain way. So, let's start with you. Like, how worried should he be that like he's suing sort of the biggest news organizations in the country, the ones that still at this point deliver a lot of the breaking news and investigations in the country?
I think it's worrisome. I think it's a tactic meant to silence the press and intimidate the press into some type of pulling back on a kind of robust, uninhibited public debate that in their coverage of the administration. That's the goal. The truth of the matter is that in all these defamation lawsuits that we've seen, experts say time and time again that these suits that he's unlikely to win, right? Very, very unlikely to win. And the reason is because the First Amendment uh, provides robust protection for the press, for all of us, to make errors, like when we are speaking about matters of that involve public officials and public figures. It's just this was set in the New York Times v. Sullivan case in 1964. It came out of, interestingly, a civil rights era case in which white elites in the South sued the New York Times for errors in a civil rights ad, saying we've been defamed. We've been defamed. It was hard to defame them, of course, for what they were doing as white supremacists, and yet. They were trying to use libel law as a tool to silence the press, and the Supreme Court at that time said no. The First Amendment. If the First Amendment means anything, it means that we have to allow some degree of error in public speech, particularly about people who are public officials. And that went on then to include public figures down the road in further cases. But it's just such an important principle. So the actual malice standard says, you're protected These institutions are protected for errors, even if they're defamatory, if these errors are made without knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard for the truth. And most professional journalists and news institutions don't go recklessly around making errors, right? And they don't have reckless disregard for the truth. That's not true of all news institutions or of all people, but it does tend to be true. And so what we know is that the Supreme Court very recently has turned down an opportunity to revisit the actual malice standard in a case. We think it's very, very robust protection still. And so my expectation is that, and hope, profound hope, is that the New York Times is going to see this through. And I hope Murdoch for the Wall Street Journal sees it through. Ownership matters here. Ownership matters, right? When you've got Paramount that has all these other business interests owning the news institutions, they're going to make they have made deals in order to protect their other interests. Same thing with Bezos. Same thing with the Walt Disney Company, right? I'm hoping the New York Times is going to hold the line for us all.
And on somebody like me who's somewhat critical of some of the mainstream legacy media times, you agree that it's bad to see them facing these kind of lawsuits still, obviously?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I can be critical too. I want the New York Times to create a democracy desk. I want them to have a vertical where they begin covering in this really, highly framed way, democratic erosion in the United States and the TikTok rising of authoritarianism. I want them to do that. I think other institutions are doing it. News institutions are doing it better, but we need the agenda setting institution to do it. That said, it is at a very important institution. They do a lot of really important kinds of investigative reporting with their incredible resources that other institutions just don't have the resources to do. I'm sorry, I want to pitch over to my colleague.
And I worry, in some ways, that the pursuit of profit, leads to the smoothing out of news coverage, but not in an overt way, right? Because I don't think anyone at the Times is like, we have to, or the Washington Post, what happened in the Washington Post is the scary thing, right? Is because there was a decision to go from bipartisan coverage, at least an acknowledgement that there are critical frames for what's happening in government, and to just outright be like, nope, that is not what we're going to do. We are just going to, forthrightly stop criticism of this administration. And I agree that it's these huge organizations that own newspapers that feel like the real threat. But part of me is like, that just happens more and more these days. It's very hard for independent institutions, and I don't know if we're going to call the Times independent, but you're right. It's not part of a global conglomerate at this point with lots of different fingers in every pie, but they still need to function in this regulatory environment. And to me, it's the culture of lack of dissent, and also the move towards what has become the dominant way for large institutions to cover politics, which is the view from nowhere, right? The classic James Fallows conception of the myth of objectivity, which the Times is probably tied up in a way that is more frustrating to me personally than almost any other institution, because I kind of love the Times. I really do. I grew up in Texas and Nebraska, and getting the Sunday Times as special delivery was such a treat for me as a teenager, right? It was the that and the New Yorker were the epitome of real journalism. And they taught me to care about politics in a big way, right? And so to see them do this performance of concern about the agenda that's actually being set by the right, and it filters in, I think, beyond the op-ed section. Their coverage of trans issues has just been terrible. And it's outside the op-ed section even, right? They still do all this great journalism, but they've adopted this view of we have to take this authoritarianism seriously, right?
Well,
Like
let me
they're
jump in
not
and
going to have a
ask.
democracy desk. They're
Right.
just not. They're not going to do it. And I mean, we can hope that this suit radicalizes them. I feel like that might be the best outcome. But
Talk about, because Kimmel is suspended temporarily, maybe permanently. Colbert is off too. Talk about, like, it's not 1993 where Jay Leno and Letterman have these huge audiences. Like, is the silencing of the late night host important? And I'll start with you about that.
That's a really good question, because on the one hand, I feel like I'm not concerned about Jimmy Kimmel, right?
He's going to be
Like,
fine economically.
he's going to be fine. Like,
Yeah,
Stephen Colbert is going to be fine. And those of us that enjoy them are also going to be able to continue to join them. In some ways, I worry about it as a trickle down effect. Like, Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel both like created spaces with their shows that were feeders, like the writers that worked on those shows, the guests that they had on those shows. They created a space where you can see like good-natured criticism, right? Like, not just good-natured, hilarious criticism, right? Like, satire is really important, and it sets a model for, like, this is also a way we can criticize power. Can be combined. And if we look at Colbert and Kimmel, they also did a lot of action. Like, one of the things that really moved me about Jimmy Kimmel, not my favorite late night show, to be honest, was how he did the casting call for actors that needed just like one or two parts to get their Screen Actors Guild health insurance, right? Like, what a wonderful like mechanic. Solidarity and worker independent, like, unions. And then he also like had, we could talk more about like Disney's cultural output, because it's a little like, I know you can't say that just because they put on Andor they are anti-fascist. But like, Jimmy Kimmel had Diego Luna as a guest host, and Diego Luna's like monologue every night with like, screw ICE, right? Like, and he like talked very passionately about it. And to see that on television from an actor, having that platform seems, I'm not going to say it's important, but it normalizes criticism.
Okay.
Right. It makes it seem like that's an accepted part of the conversation, that we can do that. And I think in some ways, just to say like that's not normal, like that's not an accepted way to even have a casual conversation, is really chilling.
Yeah,
Two more
I would agree.
questions.
I just want to
Good.
say one quick
Okay.
thing.
Yeah.
The silencing of anyone especially, is a terrible thing in a democracy, period, full stop. And the silencing of our comedians, who are often some of our greatest truth tellers, it's especially sends a very strong signal across the body politic. And it's very dangerous.
So let me ask a final question. Almost two questions. I'll start with Kathy on this one. Is talk about the historic analogies, because you wrote this book, you co-authored a book about journalism in the Jim Crow era. Talk about the historical analogies and also the sort of comparative ones between how do these tactics that Trump is doing, are they similar to what other I think the answer to this question is yes, but are they similar to what other authoritarians do? So talk about the sort of historical and then the comparative analogies here.
Yeah, so I wrote a book, Journalism in Jim Crow, in which we co-edited and contributed significantly to this book. And what we documented is the role of white newspaper editors and journalists in actively building white supremacist political economies. I mean, it wasn't just through storytelling, although that was really important, but they were active. They collaborated with political and business elites to do this. And so what we found is, what I would say is that in the Jim Crow South, these in building the Jim Crow South, these newspapers helped entrench one-party rule. They used these kinds of selective punishment of critics, and they used silencing of critics, often through all kinds of means. And that was a very powerful tool. Not only that their leaders were involved in this work, but that their newspapers then normalized all of it, or whitewashed all of it, and covered up all kinds of things along the way. And so we didn't have a lot of pushback except for the Black press. Now, what I would say is, this kind of the way in which those papers normalized and used falsehoods to entrench one-party rule and these kind of subnational authoritarian regimes. We don't want to follow that path today. We don't want to have any kind of news media ecosystem that is participating in any kind of thing like that. But what's happening now, as we see in our country, is that what has happened in Hungary and Turkey, which is using regulatory threats and is using lawsuits as a way to capture the news media, and to capture some space in the information ecosystem. And we should be all very, very concerned.
Anna, you mentioned at the beginning, or you mentioned a few minutes ago, about smaller outlets, and I'm thinking about that myself. It's like, if the New York Times has a big legal team, or has a lot of money, has a lot of social memory, I think they have a legal team. The Post, in theory, is backed by a billionaire. So I am concerned. I mean, I'll ask you this personally: Are you worried about the outlets you write for, that they might, because Gawker they might be sued out of existence? How real do you feel about that?
Oh, I think about it when I have to pay my mortgage every month. I mean, like, these are the institutions, like, these are the places that I have worked at. I mean, I've also written for all the big places, but it's been harder to find, work from there. Like, one of the things I pointed out to my MSNBC dad is that, don't you notice that there are fewer contributors? That, like, there are just, like, fewer voices on that network. And I think, like, that's something you're seeing everywhere. And I think, unfortunately, with the smaller, outlets, one issue is we're not just not prepared to be able to take on the work that a place like the Times can do, right? Like, we can do really important stuff and we can help push the conversation, but, like, where do you go for the really important big investigations, right? Like, I love ProPublica. I think that's an interesting model, but it has public support, right? Like, that is, I think, the future. Like, we need, like, was just writing about this. In some ways, we need anti-capitalist models of production in order to continue to do the work that we have to do. We need cooperatives. We need, like, some kind of nonprofit funding. We need to have, like, the resources to continue to be the voice for criticism and dissent and information. Right? Yeah. Like, I love 404 Media. I love Defector. Like, those are the places that we have to, like, support. If people are listening, like, I can't tell people to unsubscribe from the Times, because I still think we really need it. But if you are interested in the future of journalism and sustaining the kind of, like, really powerful, alternatives that can speak back to places like the Times and I think one of the roles that we can play, like you and I personally, like, can play, is to articulate the criticisms of these larger places, right? And if support can come from larger bases, from people who can, like, spare, like, something I tell people all the time, like, New Republic subscription is not it's a bargain, right? And I just go ahead and, like, say it. Like, if you are enjoying this conversation and you are thinking about unsubscribing from the Times, maybe do that. Sure, but add $8 a month, Like, we need this base to continue to push back, and hold those institutions responsible, in addition to holding the government, like, holding larger power responsible. Because who is the Times going to hear from? Like, our journalists read other journalists. I think that we are a really important voice. And again, I think that to articulate the problems, just to go back to the conversation we had last week about not necessarily being persuaders, but being like a voice that gets people to think about, oh yeah, you know what? Like that View from Nowhere issue at the time is like, that is kind of weird. Like that is something that I wish that they would do differently, you know? So I don't know if that's a particularly coherent answer, but for some reason you always ask me on like before I've had my first cup of coffee. So
And with that, this is a great conversation. Any final thoughts? Any final thoughts you have? I want to conclude. Any final thoughts?
Buy her book. I'm pointing to that's where she is. Buy her book. That sounds like a really good way of thinking about what's happening now. Like that's such a wonderful historical example.
Which book?
Her book about Jim Crow. Like I forgot
Kathy's book about. I'm sorry.
Kathy's book about Jim Crow. Yeah. What? Journalism and Jim Crow. I'm sorry, I forgot that we're moving fast. Yeah. But that I'm gonna get it, and it sounds like a really, really good model for what, unfortunately, right, for what is happening now. And subscribe to the New Republic.
All right. On that note, thank you all for joining me. Great conversation. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Great to see you.